So my name is Caroline Hodgson and I'm the president of the Bradford Textile Society. This is the third online lecture in the series this year, focused around design, innovation and sustainability. We're delighted to see so many attendees this evening, our members, those from industry, staff and students from over 20 academic institutions. We have a number of attendees globally this evening, and it's great that you can join us. Great to see you. I'm very pleased to be able to host this webinar in conjunction with the Worshipful Company of Woolmen. They're one of the oldest livery companies of the City of London, known to have existed in 1180. Today, the company is primarily a charitable fellowship, providing scholarships for those studying wool technology, awarding an annual Wool Innovation Prize, and providing prizes at the key agricultural shows. They also host an annual sheep drive for charity across London Bridge. As you may already be aware, the Bradford Textile Society was established in 1893 and has been running its design competition for the past 90 years. However, this year is the first year that entries will be submitted digitally. The deadline for entries is now being pushed back to Friday, the 21st of May, due to the current restrictions. You will be able to submit your entries from the end of April, and instructions will go out on our website when that goes live. However, if you'd like to be kept informed and up to date, please email Sue Geldard, our secretary. I think Vivian's going to post that in the chat. Her email address is secretary@bradfordtextilesociety.org.uk, and she will make sure that you're on the mailing list. So yes, I'll go on to introduce our panelists for this evening. We're very appreciative that they can join us this evening, all who have a great deal of knowledge of the wool industry. So we'll just bring them in. We have Dr. Mark Sumner, who is our chair for this evening, and he is a lecturer in sustainability, retail and fashion at the School of Design at the University of Leeds. We have Janet Prescott. Let's see if we can just ask Janet to join us. Janet, if you can start your video. Janet is textile journalist and editor of WTIN, Twist magazine. We have Frankie Davis, owner and director of Charles Knitwear, and Peter Ackroyd, MBE. Let's just join him there. Just put the video on. Yes, Peter Ackroyd, MBE, Chief Operating Officer for the Campaign for Wool, Global Strategic Advisor to the Woolmark Company, and I should mention he was past president of the Bradford Textile Society in 2008. So the panel are going to give a short presentation each and then respond to questions. Please do post questions for Mark in the Q&A, and he will put these to the panelists at the end. So just to clarify, if we can have any pressing technical issues in the chat and questions to the panelists in the Q&A for Mark, please, just to help us answer most effectively. So we'll start with a video by Peter, which gives a historical context to the wool industry. That will run for around 7 minutes, and then I'll be back with you shortly. Thank you.
To find the origins of the wool industry in West Yorkshire, and indeed the world, you need to come to this part of West Yorkshire, Saltaire, Bradford. This is where it all started. The manufacturing of wool began in the beginning of the 19th century in these valleys. The water was soft. The wool came from Australia via the canal systems from Liverpool. Mills prospered around this area, making worsted, suitings, and women's wear materials for the clothing manufacturers in Leeds, 14 miles away down the river. This mill, what we're in at the moment, opened in 1853, and I think in the old days would produce around 20 million meters of fabric a year. That was replicated throughout this region, and then it went to Italy, then it went to Turkey, then it went to China, but the beginnings are here. First wool from Australia came back here in 1807, and in a way competed with local wools. Now, local wools from the hills of West Yorkshire, the hills of the Lake District, not terribly far away from here, were obviously used in carpets and heavy-duty fabrics. By heavy-duty, I mean overcoats, military fabrics, and of course we now have a big production in this country of tweed, and tweed is often made out of a Cheviot sheep wool, of which there are millions in this part of the world. The Australian merino and the South African merino were typical fibres used in mills in West Yorkshire for suitings, uniforms, and ladies' fabrics. It's a finer micron wool from the merino, which originated from Spain and was taken out to Australia at the end of the 18th century by a gentleman called John MacArthur and his wife Elizabeth, who cultivated the merino flocks in Parramatta in New South Wales. Sadly, at the end of the Korean War in 1953, we saw a rapid decline of worsted manufacturing in this area. That is linked intimately to the development of man-made fibres, particularly acrylic fibres and polyester fibres in Europe and in the emerging economies of East Asia. They competed purely on price, and mills in this area closed down one by one until the rot stopped, if I can say that, around the late part of the 20th century. There were several mills in this area who were fine and niche. They were aiming their production at a rather refined taste level in knitwear and in suitings and jacketings. And that British look, that British style, exported itself very well to the emerging economies of Asia. And particularly we start with Japan in the 1960s when the Japanese market opened up, followed by Korea in the 1980s, and followed by China in the 1990s. So you have three powerful economies that are enjoying good quality fabrics, good quality tailoring, good quality manufacturing, and above all, luxury brands. And British fabrics in this part of the world, in the finer micron category, and also in the tweed category, were there to service those brands which were often licensed in Japan and Korea. Casualization hit the industry about 10 years ago, and the spinners and weavers of worsted yarn in particular have been rather clever in adapting a feel, a touch, that makes a next-to-skin garment in merino, fine merino, under 16 micron, the most amazing garment one can wear. It's got odor control, it's got climate control, it keeps you warm when it's cold and cool when it's hot. It's a natural choice. Wool is not cheap and never has been. To produce a wool next to skin garment is an expensive item. A cotton, a polyester one is not. What we have been successful in doing is developing the right fabrics, the right yarns and fabrics for next to skin, for active sportswear, for what we call athleisure. But we haven't been able to really compete with cotton and polyester on price, and I don't think we want to. What we need to do is to explain to the consumer the ecological and environmental advantages of investing a bit more in wool. Firstly, for comfort next to skin. Secondly, for the biodegradable environmental advantages of having a natural fibre as part of your sporting kit. The current pandemic that has hit all the major economies is having a massive effect on production in this part of the world. The mills in this area of West Yorkshire and in Scotland and in the west of England should normally be producing their fabrics by the kilometre for the autumn-winter season 2020-21. That production slowed down dramatically, with reports of mills losing 50 to 70% of production. the big acid test for the industry will be the performance at retail, both brick and mortar and online, in the autumn of this year in the Northern Hemisphere. We're waiting to see what happens. I have two ideas. One, casualization will continue, and we need to capitalize on the message of environmental sustainability of wool in that sector of the market. The other area we've got to discuss is that there will be some revenge buying of formal wear. There will be some revenge buying of smart suits, smart jackets, smart trousers, etc. But that will be, in my view, quite niche. And this sort of market trend very much favors made to measure. A lot of companies that were normally known for their ready-to-wear are working very, very cleverly with made to measure at prices very often not dissimilar to the ready-to-wear prices. The words reset, rethink, rejig, remodel have been used very much in discussions about the world of fashion and the world of interiors and living post-COVID. I think the Prince of Wales's message for a global reset is timely. It's not a new message. The Prince of Wales has been saying that for the last 30 to 40 years. We hope that any reset or any rethinking about fashion and about what I would say the evils of fast fashion will include a manner of thinking about the ecology and the environment, and to understand that wool is an amazing fiber that actually biodegrades, enriches the soil, is good next to skin. It has all the attributes of something which is of great value not only to the consumer, but of great value to the environment.
Thank you for that, Peter. That was really very informative. I understand that you filmed that last autumn. Would you like to say a few words before we go over to Janet?
Yeah, very. Is it loud and clear, Caroline?
Yes, thank you, Peter. Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yeah, I recorded that last autumn, and of course the autumn season of last year, for 2020, was very poor indeed, and we're looking really with hope to the next autumn of 2021. And in the textile cycle, we should have been visiting garment fairs in Europe now to see retailers putting orders down for delivery for the autumn season in the Northern Hemisphere. This is not happening. As we speak, so my predictions are hopefully that there will be a curtain raiser to better days with Premier Vision and Milano Unica and the Pitti Filati shows, the trade shows where the mills in this part of the world, spinners and weavers, show their collections a year ahead, will be happening hopefully in September. But just to put it all in context, wool is now 1.2% of total fiber consumption. 40 years ago, when I first went to work in a mill, it was 8%, but we have 1 billion sheep in the world. So there is something to go at. And I think if you move the dial a little bit toward from 1.2% to 2.2% or even to 3%, then you begin to have you begin to make a difference with the environment and with the whole ecosystem, which in my view is being destroyed by fast fashion. So with that, Caroline, I'll leave it there. You wanted me to be brief, so please, any questions, fire them via Mark. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, let's certainly hope so. So Janet, if we could ask you to unmute, please, and I understand you're going to share your up-to-the-minute knowledge on what's happening in the textile industry with us.
Right, good. This is a quick run through the reasons which make me optimistic for wool. I've called it reasons to be cheerful, this bit. Wool and its uses have changed radically since I came into the textile industry. Already synthetic fabrics, as Peter was saying, had eaten into the amount of wool used in fashion, and menswear and carpets, which would cause the collapse of mills and factories in the UK and Europe. And now, because of the pandemic lockdowns, we see the price for wool and other products falling, leading to unsold fleeces and untold anxiety. But there are reasons to be cheerful. So I chose a picture of a flying girl in a blue dress, which she was the winner of the Pitti Filati in Florence design, Feel the Yarn design last year. And I think that's pretty good. And it's all wool. Eco matters mean wool is back in favour in almost all areas and forging new ones, actually. The Woolmark companies cleverly brought the word merino back into the language of the young and elevated wool into cool city wear across the world. Young designers internationally take high performance sportwear and urban cycling gear into their own vocabulary. And in this, special qualities of wool have been particularly crucial. The regulation of body climate, weather resistant, water repellent, wicking, versatile, and looking good, of course. At the same time, genuine handmade Fair Isle Guernseys and Harris Tweed are trending everywhere. I've just got the stuff through from the digital fairs which are going on about Milano Unica and Florence and in Paris. And the Guernseys and Harris Tweeds are very important, including Bernie Saunders mittens, as well as natural undyed yarns and softest fine knits. Sustainability is the sustainability goals are sort of buzzwords at the moment, as we all know. It has the advantage, in a word, of being familiar, but the disadvantage of being interpreted in very different ways. There's growing consensus on minimising damage to the environment. Wool is well placed. It's placed here in Australia. It can be traced from the sheep right through to different processes. It can be recycled, unravelled and repurposed, or put back into the soil to decompose. And it's really the circle of life, but I won't sing. Tackling plastic, of course, is the problem of plastic waste, which we all know about. It's been put into great relief by the face masks across the world, largely plastic, polyester or nylon, difficult to dispose of. It's waste which is owned by nobody, and it's a symbol of the problems facing the world at the moment, because wool masks are an example of plastic replacement, comfortable and efficient as a filter. They don't irritate, they thermoregulate, and they are biodegradable. So I don't know why we're not all using them, really. In the same way, wool bubble wrap and wool packaging is now appearing at our doors to replace plastic bags. Perhaps not with the Amazon man, but it might not be a glamorous way of using wool, but it is a very 21st century. And wools are used to counteract sick building syndrome instead of using countless chemicals to clean air. Wool carpets are in favour, which is good news for British wool. Noisy wood floors apparently were unnoticed until people have been locked down together, and it's been very noisy. They've had very noisy environments, and it's wool that people are choosing when they're choosing new carpets. So that's good. And traceable wool is used for both bedding and beds to avoid synthetics, involving named wool breeds, like this beautiful blue face here, and the wool by the Wool Room, for instance, who actually make bedding and beds with Herdwick and different breeds. Wool can replace fiberglass, and there's a wool surfboard just been invented in New Zealand. And then the Ford motors are using prototypes using virgin and waste wool in electric eco cars. So that obviously is going to run and run. The next thing is health and well-being. Again, one of the modern obsessions, really, especially with the lockdown. Fine merino and yoga, dance and sport go together for performance and comfort, with great advantages to knitting. With seamless wool worn next to the skin, and many glamorous versions like the pink silken merino in the slide spun by Cariaggi. And you can't be allergic to wool. This is the important conclusion published by the IWTO in a new report, which came out recently, called Debunking the Myth of Wool Allergy. And wool, in fact, is a medical marvel. It is used for newborn babies. It protects, it's bioactive for burn sufferers. It dresses open wounds and it's recommended for eczema. And socks improve blood control and stabilization. I mean, who knew that? Sock sales, in fact, are worth $44.6 billion US, 6% of wool. Amazing things that wool is connected with. The wool's most important use is probably in fashion, chosen by every great designer, now longed for by young designers if they can get it. Bright wool knitwear seen in the various shows this season, and Woolmark points out significant innovations which have come through: wool fur, wool velvet, and wool terry loop jersey as well. And upmarket menswear is changing. Fine worsted fabrics are reimagined with more colour and disrupted patterns, and also wool denim trousers. Performance wool produces fabrics fit for higher octane sports on mountains and seas, and yachtings and marathons like the ones on the right there, the Pirelli. And new travel suits have natural stretch in classic fine wool fabrics. They're lightweight, water repellent, non-crease and fully washable, like the knitting wool, which is now fully washable for knitwear. And now come merino wool shoes worn by influencers on social media. You can't underestimate the influence of celebrities. President Biden's bright blue Ralph Lauren suit, the tweeds of the First Ladies, Lady Gaga's Schiaparelli, all featured starry, sourceable wool fabrics, including the poet Amanda Gormley's bright yellow Prada coat. Details are out on the internet in minutes, as powerful as the cat walks. Yeah, but we need to tell the story of wool. People want data and facts. They're used to find out what they wear. Look at the label, we say, but fibre content is not always there, especially on internet sales. The tags and QR on the garments feed into traceability and value, and I think we ought to do something about that, really. Ultimately, science leads back to the farm. Farmers, spinners and weavers are intimately involved in sustainability and tracing, starting where traditional husbandry meets science, bringing enormous improvements in breeding sheep for the quality of wool and well-being. And then the last thing I wanted to say was keep an eye out for graphene. This is an amazing derivative. It's a wool printer with graphene from nanocarbons. It's a new science. It's certainly fascinating, the Woolmark company and many others. It's antibacterial, it's invisible, it controls temperature and conducts electricity. And it's really got it's got unknown potential. So watch this space. Basically, wool will never be a cheap option, but its value has been recognized as a very modern material in 2021, and it has a bright future. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. That was a fantastic insight into the innovative ways that wool is being used today. Thank you.
High speed.
Yes, you did well to cram it all in, as it's so diverse. But hopefully we'll come back to you in the discussion and have a chance to delve deeper. So we'll go over to Frankie now. Frankie is going to share the approaches she has taken to create a more sustainable knitwear company. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me nice and clearly?
Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so hi, my name is Frankie Davies and I'm the founder of Shawl Knitwear, a sustainable British knitwear brand with heritage craftsmanship and British wool at its core. I'd like to talk about what wool means to me in the 21st century and how it relates to my work. I've been working as a knitwear designer in the fashion industry since I graduated from Kingston University more than 20 years ago. I immediately began working in Italy, firstly in Milan and then in Treviso for the Benetton Group, where I became the knitwear designer for their Sisley collection. This was a great time to work for the brand as they still produced all of their knitwear in Italy, down the road from the design studios. I learnt so much from the yarn technicians, machine programmers and knitting technicians that has provided me with invaluable hands-on knowledge for the rest of my career. After Benetton, I moved back to London to work for Burberry as a senior knitwear designer for their women's mainline collection. This again was a great time to be at the company, whilst it was transitioning from a small heritage British clothing company into a global brand. Since the birth of my 2 children, I've been consulting for smaller British labels, mainly Studio Nicholson, and 2 years ago, I began working on my own collection. I've become increasingly aware of the impact of fashion and clothing has on the planet, animal welfare, and garment workers, especially after working in the industry and reading Lucy Siegel's book, To Die For, Is Fashion Wearing Out the World, and watching Stacey Dooley's TV documentaries on the subject. At the time when I started working on my collection, I felt that most fashion brands were not seriously addressing this issue. So I felt compelled to create my own collection, showing that it is possible to create a sustainable and largely traceable knitwear collection. This is a work in progress because it's not all elements are as sustainable as I would like them to be. For example, I would like to use plant-based dyes on the whole of my collection in the future, but these are currently only available in certain yarns at present. But as with any supply chain, you keep pushing the boundaries and eventually you get there. I think we've got some sheep coming up. Yeah. I started out with wool for my collection because it is a fibre that we have in abundance in this country and which is being chronically underutilised, not to mention its endless benefits, more of which are being discovered every year. In my opinion, it is the most sustainable natural fibre for the reasons outlined by the previous 2 speakers. In my career, I've been lucky to work for brands who can afford to use 100% wool in its various forms, from Geelong for colourful argyles and stripes, Merino for next to skin softness and drape, to Tweed in more textured yarns for heavier knits and outerwear pieces. Wool is not cheap, but the benefits of using it from a designer's perspective are endless. It's far more durable than synthetic fibres, maintaining its shape and form under multiple washes. It does not fade or become shapeless, and it can be dyed or over-dyed into endless assortments of colours. As a designer working to tight fashion calendars, it is difficult to find the time to carry out in-depth studies of the yarns you choose to use. You often rely on what's being proposed by the mills each season, and they don't always have the same eco-agenda as you. However, the textile industry is now responding to the consumer demand for more ecological, sustainable and recycled fibres, so more of these options are available. It is still a challenge, though, to convince the end consumer to buy fewer products of better quality, as they will ultimately last longer, look better over time, and most importantly, be better for our environment. Working with a local yarn means that the carbon footprint is greatly reduced. With British wool, it is much easier to monitor because its journey is so much shorter. I believe that people are becoming increasingly discerning about the provenance of what they buy. Certainly in food, consumers are asking where it comes from, how it has been treated, and how far it has been transported. And this is spreading into the clothing industry. Ultimately, I think this change has been and will continue to be consumer-led. My own collection takes its inspiration from the heritage craftsmanship and stitches of the Norfolk fishermen's Guernsey jumpers near where I grew up. These were worn by the fishermen during the second half of the 19th and first half of 20th centuries, before the wide use of man-made technical fibres were adopted for outerwear. I wanted to create a collection which celebrated the importance of their legacy and craftsmanship, making it more visible to a wider audience through a more modern interpretation of fit and shape, better suited to the wearer's needs in the 21st century. The original Guernseys were knitted in a Yorkshire worsted yarn, and I wanted to get as close to this wool as possible because it's perfect for recreating the iconic stitches that were knitted into these pieces. Wool's natural elasticity, lustre and evenness make these stitches stand out, creating almost sculptural fabrics and silhouettes. I found that using the sheep soft wool from the Laxton mill near Shipley, I was able to create machine knitted stitches that were really sculptural and 3-dimensional without being heavy or dense. The garments have a hand knitted feel to them like the original Guernseys, which is exactly what I was aiming for, as this is the antithesis of fast fashion and mass production. I worked extensively on with my knitwear factories in London and in Perugia, Italy, to get the correct tension, wash and handle for the yarn, which varies between colours. This is all part of the challenge when creating a modern collection which incorporates style, sustainability and heritage, whilst feeling thoroughly resolved to the wearer. I think we've got another slide coming up. Yeah. So my objectives in creating this collection were to preserve and make the most of this centuries-old natural resource, the wool, whilst creating garments that have a real cultural significance to them, story and sense of style. They are not just another jumper to be discarded after a couple of years, but instead they should become wardrobe favourites, cherished and passed down through generations like special clothes used to be in the past. I believe that wool is a precious resource with numerous benefits to both our own and our planet's well-being, resources that are only just being discovered. Sometimes, I think rather than over-designing, over-producing and constantly being on the lookout for novelty and newness, perhaps we should be slowing down, taking a closer look at what we already have and use this as our starting point for inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Frankie. There's some really beautiful pieces of knitwear there. It's great to see British wool being put to such good use. So we're now going to go over to Mark, our chair for this evening, to put the questions to the panelists. Please do post any questions that you have in the Q&A. There should be a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. This is different to the chat. And Mark is monitoring the Q&A, so that will help to ensure that questions do get put to the panelists. Okay, thank you, Mark. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, and many thanks to the presenters. As always with these events, you think you know a lot about wool, and then all of a sudden you discover you don't know very much at all. So it's been great to listen to everyone in terms of their presentation. As always, it's always great to hear from Peter and get a bit of the history behind wool, but also using that to predict what the future could look like. And I think Janet really touched on the complexity of wool as a fibre. I mean, it's a very, very complex fibre, and as a result of that, it has some fantastic performance qualities that give it a huge amount of diversity in terms of how it can be used. And I think what Frankie talked about, I mean, her career demonstrates how constantly the fashion industry, the clothing industry is constantly changing, and we need to evolve to reflect the changes that we're seeing. And now is that moment where everything is changing. Anything can happen at any time. And I guess you can gather from my enthusiasm about wool, along with everyone else, that we're all really passionate about wool as being a really good fibre. The challenge is out to everyone that's listening today to post as many questions as you can, and do feel be as radical or as challenging as you want. If you're too radical, I'll just ignore the question. No, joking aside, do put as many questions as you can into the chat room, and we'll try and get as many of those questions answered. So my request to all of the panel is please answer the questions as best you can, but you can keep it short and sweet. That'd be brilliant, so we can get as many questions covered as possible. So first question, I guess, to Peter. One of the questions we've got posted here is, do we know how much wool is actually imported into the UK now? And where does that wool come from? And maybe, Peter, when we talk about where that wool comes from, try to understand why we import so much wool in relationship to all of the British wool we have here. What is it about British wool that maybe isn't suitable for clothing?
It's all to do, it's all to do about a question of micron. The Australian wools, the South African wools, the South American wools are finer micron because they come from a merino sheep. The wools that we see in the UK on the hills, of which I think there are about 33 million sheep in the UK, which are about 90 different breeds. It's a micron problem. It's not fine enough to go next to skin. It's good to go into tweed, it's good to go into carpets, but it's a question of fineness. And the first Australian merino came into the UK in 1807, and it was brought in specifically because it was finer than local breeds. So it's a question of micron, basically.
Thank you, Peter. And there was another question that's been posted about allergies to wool, and this is a subject quite close to my heart, because I know quite a few people in my family have talked about having an allergy to wool. But actually, my understanding is that wool doesn't cause an allergy. It's if you've got the wrong micron of wool, it tends to prickle on the skin because it's quite coarse. So if you do have a problem with that you think is an allergy, do think about looking for that extra fine merino wool in your garments. So thank you for that, Peter. That's great. A question, Janet, for you, if I could, or maybe Frankie as well. there's a question posted here from Malcolm Campbell, and some of you that have been in the wool industry for a while will know of Malcolm, ex-Parkland. Malcolm has posted a question here about, do we think we're suffering in the UK textile and clothing industry with the industry being dumbed down in terms of the technology, in terms of understanding wool, and even understanding how wool plays a really interesting role in the design process? So I wonder, Frankie, maybe you might want to have a look at that, and maybe we'll then head over to Janet to see what her view is.
I mean, wool, British wool or wool in more generally?
It's this idea that maybe what we're seeing within the industry, the clothing industry, there's a dumbing down of the complexities of the industry.
I think from a fashion perspective, I think it's all about softness. I think people have got very used to buying cashmere at quite a low price, and that sort of sets the standard, and then you can get lots of synthetic fibres that feel very soft to the skin and cost less than wool. I think ultimately you can get wools that are as soft as cashmere and it's as soft as synthetic fibres. It's just I suppose the question is, are people prepared to pay for them, and are they, I think the big question to ask yourself when you're buying garments nowadays is, well, if it's synthetic, is it going to biodegrade? What harm is it going to do to the environment? And the wonderful thing with wool is it lasts a really long time. You can, if you buy it, you're going to be able to wear it for a long time, and it's not going to do any harm to anybody or anything. Once you discard it.
Thanks, Frankie. And Janet, just around this idea of sort of education and knowledge from a consumer point of view, do you feel that there's any sort of dumbing down in the sense that people don't really understand textiles and don't really understand wool, and therefore they don't value it as much?
I think they understand a lot more than they used to, because there's been a huge synergy between the schools and things like the IWTO and the Woolmark company, who've tried to explain to them that it actually fits in with a lot of the thoughts of the young people these days anyway, who are looking for things which are sustainable and good things to wear. I can remember when my children were younger, they came in with 2 purchases, and I said, I like your wool jumpers, and they said to me, oh no, they're merino. So they realized that merino is something, they were young then, but I mean, it's they've done a good job in trying to explain that wool isn't the same as the other fibers, which which can cause untold damage, really. And the thing about the biodegradable, I think they really do understand. It's a story that they all know about now. Plastics. I mean, I've got a 3-year-old grandson who knows that plastic, you're not supposed to put plastic anywhere except in a certain part of the kitchen and things like that. I think it's doing well, beginning to explain which are the fabrics which are useful to us.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you. There's lots and lots of questions coming through, so I think we might be on this meeting until about 10 o'clock tonight to get through all of them. So do bear with me. So we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. An open question to all 3 people on the panel. With the current environment of COVID and more people working from home, and I haven't left my study for a year now. Except obviously to go and get some food now and then. But with that change in terms of working behaviour, working patterns, what's the future for wool, bearing in mind that wool generally, for a lot of people, has been considered quite a formal product. Anyone got any views on where that goes? Janet, please. I
have, in the sense that I'm doing the shows at the moment digitally, and there's an enormous amount of very thick jumpers. Beautiful jumpers, and I was talking to some of the people who were showing in Paris, and they were saying that people were finding that their bills were going up. They were spending so much time at home that they'd be looking for big, thick jumpers, and that's what's happened, and that's what you're seeing for the next season, which I think is quite a nice answer.
No, thank you for that, Janet. Yeah, it is interesting the way that people have looked at working from home and the impact of the cold weather in particular. Yeah, that's great. Peter?
Yeah, I think, Mark, you'll see that over the pandemic and with a lot of working from home and shopping online, knitwear has done rather well.
Yeah.
Knitwear manufacturers are not complaining. What has been a complete disaster is the formal wear. There have been no weddings. Sadly, there have also been no funerals. There have been no race meetings. There have been no business meetings. It's been a disaster, and that disaster is reflected also on the interior textile side. There have been no renewal of carpets in cruise ships. There have been no renewal of carpets in hotels and casinos. So that side of the business has suffered dramatically, and you will see mills in this area who are and in Italy and China and Turkey who are showing a reduction in production of about between 50 and 70%. That will, I hope, to a certain extent come back, but then we have to recalculate and recalibrate our view of home working and our view of casualisation. It's taken casualisation a big leap forward.
And Peter, just on that point, with British wools, if I understand correctly, going more orientated to carpets and sort of the homeware, is British wool being more affected than maybe the merino that would come out of Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa?
Absolutely, the price of crossbred wool has gone down quite dramatically, and and we read in the press about farmers. I've read about a farmer burning his wool, etc., which is an absolute tragedy. So the crossbred wools that go into carpets and interiors are down in price. There is some hope that because people are working from home, they're renewing carpets at home. So the domestic carpet industry is going rather well. We need a boost in the what we call the contract industry to give British wool and New Zealand wools the boost and the price hike that they need to make it worthwhile farming sheep. It's as bad as that at the moment, to be very honest.
Thanks, Peter. And Frankie, the sort of same question across to you.
So can you rephrase it again for me? Sorry.
So it was trying to build on this idea of the changes in social patterns, and you know, is there a future for wool now that more and more people are working from home and less formal wear? Most
definitely. I'd agree with Janet that there's a lot more people wearing knitwear, you know, to work from while they're sitting at their desk, while they're doing their Zoom meetings. I think there's a lot of interest in, you know, you've got your upper half of your body is visible, so you know, nice necklines, scarves. I think that it's definitely on trend from a fashion perspective. And I think, you know, yeah, you get cold sitting at your desk, you want to wear something warm. I mean, I certainly do, and I think that's also the reason why loungewear has become so popular as well, because or kind of semi-smart loungewear, because it's very comfortable, keeps you warm, but it also looks really nice when you've got to pop on the camera. So I think it is definitely a trend at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, great, thank you for that. One trend that I came across by talking to one of the mainstream retailers the other day, that they were saying that anything with an elasticated waist sells like hot potatoes.
I've had those conversations as well. Definitely, yeah. It's going to be a shock when we have to get back into tailoring. Absolutely.
So we talked a little bit about the impact of COVID, for example, but I just wonder whether anyone's got any views on questions come up about the impact of Brexit. Do we see any impact for the wool industry around Brexit, or for the clothing and textile industry that's based on wool being affected by Brexit? Or is it too early to tell? Anybody like to jump in on that one?
Mark, if I could, yes, it's a possible disaster. The rules of intra-European trade require things to be made in one country and not to be brought in from an outside country. So if you were bringing in your yarn from India or from China, having it made up into cloth in the UK, re-exporting that cloth is going to be difficult. It's going to require paperwork. I can illustrate it by a friend of mine has a weaving plant in Lillehammer in Norway, and they're not part of the EU. And all the yarn he imports from Italy has to be cleared at the Swedish land border. And he reckons at a cost of around 5% of his total weaving costs. So it is expensive, it's time consuming. And those of you old enough to remember when every parcel we sent to the European Union, presents, goods, samples had to have a green label, a green ticket, and had to be cleared by customs. It's a damn nuisance. For the industry, it shouldn't have happened. We talked about the fishing industry, which I gather from the FT article earlier this week, is about this. The total volume of the fishing industry is about the turnover of Harrods, the clothing industry has been totally sidelined. No one wants to talk about it. And there was an article that Paul Smith piloted in the FT, which I think I've got on a PDF. So if anybody wants it, I can send it to Caroline to you so you can see it. It's not good. And I won't be rude about people who voted to leave who wouldn't dare on the.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that, Peter. There are some things that we shouldn't talk about in a public forum like this, maybe. But
absolutely, even expletive, even deleted, expletive deleted. Yes, of course. Yeah,
absolutely. So thanks for that. An interesting question just popped in, which I think is actually really quite interesting from a consumer point of view. Now, some of us sitting on the panel, are sort of wool experts, and someone like myself who's sort of involved in sustainability sort of know some of the challenges that we face in terms of clothing choices. But an interesting question has been posted here about how do we go about choosing a wool product or a garment and be secure that what we're purchasing is the sustainable choice. Does anybody have any advice for consumers out there on what they should be looking for, in terms of a good wool garment, so good quality wool garment, but then also in terms of thinking about a good wool garment and is it a sustainable wool product for consumers? Anybody like to jump in on that nice little question?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what an unsustainable wool garment is really, because everything about wool is sustainable. So I think if you're buying a pure wool from a reputable retailer or designer, it will be sustainable.
So Janet, I understand that the point you're making there, and I've just seen a couple of other questions flick up, and there's often a question about animal welfare, for example. And I'm just wondering that, when we talk about sustainability, it's about environmental impact, but also about some of the ethical aspects as well.
Well, I think all the people involved in the big organisations have got a policy on the sustainability of wool as far as animal welfare is concerned. I mean, it's a live issue. And it's something they're looking at all the time, and lots of practices have been changed. But basically, it's something which is top of the agenda. I mean, Peter would know about that definitely. It's his. Yeah,
thank you, Jenna. I think Frankie, you were going to say something. Then it'd be nice to.
I mean, I was going to say. I think, sort of from a consumer's point of view, I think obviously, well, all wool is kind of eco-friendly in the sense that it's biodegradable. So that's ticking one. But I think the thing with trying to be as sustainable and sustainable as possible, I think you've got to think about different things. So, okay, is it a natural fibre? Is it biodegradable? What is its carbon footprint as well? Because obviously some garments or some products sort of go all the way around the world and then back again. So you've got to kind of think about where's it come from as well. That's another box that needs to be ticked. I mean, I kind of think of it as a kind of a checklist. So, there's a certain amount of boxes. You're not going to be able to tick all of them. You're just going to try and tick as many as you can. So obviously things like biodegradability is really important. The carbon footprint is really important. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Obviously animal welfare. I think as a designer trying to source yarns through my career, I think that the more information the brand provides on how traceable it is, how eco-friendly it is, how sustainable it is, then I think if they do it, then they show it. If they don't do it, they don't show it. So I think that you just have to try and find as much information as you can on the care labels, on the swing tickets, and kind of use that really. That's definitely what I would, that's definitely how I would choose jumper. Absolutely,
and I would totally endorse that. One of the big challenges for consumers is understanding what brands are doing. Bit of research.
If they're not doing it, I mean, if they're doing it, they'll talk about it. If they're not doing it, they will not talk about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good rule of thumb, not just around wool, but any aspect of the clothing industry. Peter, I'm aware of initiatives such as the Responsible Wool Sourcing initiative, for example, that that covers a number of areas of sustainability. I just want to get your view in terms of this idea of how would we identify whether the wool that we're buying is from the most sustainable source possible.
I think you've got to ask certain questions, and I think labels give away certain answers, but not the entire story. I think certainly if you look at organisations that you've been associated with and companies you've been associated with, Marks and Spencer's, for example, Next, some of the big organisations are very, very demanding on questions of provenance, of welfare, etc. I'm happy with that. And the first thing I did when I became president of the International Textile Organisation, put together the sheep welfare specifications, and these were based on the 5 freedoms, which are, I think, what freedom from hunger, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, and disease, freedom to express normal behaviour, and freedom from fear and distress. And those are enshrined in the laws of the land of the wool-growing countries of Argentina, Uruguay, Australia, New Zealand, UK, South Africa, and they're very, very strict indeed. So the rules are there, and the sheep welfare specifications that we published at IWTO, which you can see online, are sort of vetted and peer-reviewed by the OAE, the World Trade Organization Animal Welfare body in Paris. So as much has been done as possible. It was my priority, and I'm happy that a lot of people are adhering to that. There's going to be something coming up in the European Union, we mentioned Brexit, called the PEF, the Product Environmental Footprint, whereby you're going to have to prove where things came to get the right award on the label, and the label will have to be exhibited at point of sale, both online and in brick and mortar, by I think 2025. So the EU Green Initiative, which is going to be at the forefront of a lot of discussions in the next few years, is very much onto that. So it's going to be very, very traceable, very, very evident in store and online.
Thank you for that, Peter. And of course, particularly for merino wool, we should recognise that merino wool are not reared for meat production. They're generally reared for fibre production. So there's an interesting difference between people's views of animal welfare for meat production as opposed to wool production. It's a very complex area to look at. But I just wanted to sort of move on a little bit and start thinking about different aspects of the sustainability of wool, and trying to get an understanding of what people think about wool in comparison to the most popular natural fibre, which is cotton. And I just wonder if anyone's got any views about, what's the pros and cons for wool in comparison to cotton when we're talking about garments and what's best for consumers. Anybody want to?
I think Janet.
No, I was just going to say that cotton is generally held to be quite polluting in lots of cases. I mean, the Better Cotton Initiative obviously is trying to obviate this, but a lot of cotton is grown in places where water is not very well, very well available, and yet it uses a lot of cotton, and there are a lot of insecticides have to be used, and it has to be bleached. I mean, there are all sorts of processes before you actually get to spinning the cotton, which are actually quite difficult. And
it's very difficult to trace it through all the different processes that go through as well, isn't it? I think it's such a very long, complicated sort of procedure that is very, very difficult to know where it's literally it's very difficult to trace it from where it starts to where it ends up.
Yes. I mean, one of the big things is it uses so much water in places where water is very, very scarce. That's a
I think it's interesting, isn't it, that when we look at particularly anyone that's looked at the sustainability of cotton will recognise the fact that in spite of it being a natural fibre, there are all sorts of sustainability issues associated with it, which it comes down to actually the way that we grow cotton, which is the problem rather than the fibre itself. Peter, did you wanted to add anything else in terms of wool and cotton?
I think wool can work well with cotton. I think there's some very good alternatives for cotton. The menu for cotton is very good indeed. But let's face it, the bulk of cotton has massive problems with water usage, for example. But in terms of biodegradability, I would much prefer to work with cotton than with polyester, for example, because polyester will linger in landfill forever, and cotton has a biodegradable quality, which is not as good as wool, but it's certainly not going to linger, as you see with acrylic and polyester, which is the great scourge of the future.
So
can I also just say that actually wearing a cotton next to skin cotton garment or a next to skin wool merino garment, there's no comparison. I mean, you sweat so much more in a cotton or a synthetic fibered garment, and in a merino, I mean, I don't want to sound disgusting, but you don't need to wash it after every use. I mean, and it's so much more comfortable because it just manages your body temperature so much better. It's just so you can't compare it. It's so much more comfortable.
Well, Frank, I'm really glad you brought up sweat. That's one of my specialist subjects. I'm going to embarrass myself now that I wore a merino wool base layer when I did Land's End John O'Groats cycle ride some years ago. I wore the same base layer. It wasn't washed over 10 days. And what was really intriguing about wool as a fibre, this complex fibre, the most fascinating thing about it was it breathable, it was warm. And then when you put it on the next day, it was completely deodorized. And that's one of the great things. And in many ways, that has a sustainability aspect to it as well, because I don't have to wash it as much, which means less water, less detergents, etc. I just want to, we are getting close to the end of the session, and there's a big thing that people have talked about quite a lot, and this is this terrible thing called fast fashion. Now, I'm going to put my hand up here and stand out amongst the crowd, I think, by saying I don't have a problem with fast fashion, but if you get a chance, I might explain that. But it'd be really interesting to see what people think in terms of, as a movement, what is it that we can be doing for consumers to explain to them and help them understand some of the values of a slower industry, and the fact that wool could play a really important part in that. Does anybody want to jump on that one?
Can I quote Vivienne Westwood when we worked with Vivienne Westwood a few years ago? And Vivienne's quite avant-garde. But, Vivienne said, "Buy less, buy well, buy wool," which was just one soundbite, which I think sums it up perfectly.
Thank you, Peter. And Janet?
Well, it's the who made my clothes element there, isn't it? I think that does get to young people a bit when they suddenly realise that the people who are making them are getting paid very badly a lot of the time. And the social aspect, I think, is the way you can get at that if you want to stop people buying rubbish.
I mean, I think if a price looks too good to be true, it is. I mean, we all know that now, really. I mean, it is too good to be true, and somebody's paying the price. And I think it's just a case of not putting your head in the sand and not thinking about it. It's all of our responsibilities, everyone that buys anything, to think, okay, this isn't right, this is too cheap. I'm going to have a bad conscience if I buy this, because I know that somewhere along the line somebody or something is paying the price, and that is ultimately the case, I think, with fast fashion.
Yes, I think that's the main argument, really. It's not necessarily the fact that it might be it might not biodegrade or something, because they want to wear it for a short time and just throw it away or whatever. But I mean, the fact that somebody is actually involved in it, I think, is the sort of moral argument which gets through to them, really.
And that's a really interesting angle, isn't it? Because I think lots of people talk about the environmental footprints of a garment. I was involved in a project that looked at how many pairs of hands would have touched your garment in the production process. And just in the garment factory, now bearing in mind the garment factory is the last process in that long chain, it was at least 28 pairs of hands. So that there's 28 people that have invested time and energy in terms of making those clothes. Now, in spite of me saying that, and there is a question that's been posted about why I'm a fan of fast fashion.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, I think there's a really interesting aspect about democratization of fashion. Yeah. And if we go back 200 years, or even we only have to go back maybe 70 years, the only people who were allowed to be engaged in fashion, to create their self-identity and have self-esteem, were those people who were rich. Now, what we've got now is a situation where anyone, in spite of their background, can generate their self-esteem and self-identity. Yeah. And that is one of the benefits of fast fashion. One of the challenges I know is that the way that we do fast fashion is very destructive, or can be quite disruptive in terms of the footprint. So it's really about trying to work out the balance of these things, rather than saying, let's make everything expensive and then all of a sudden only certain people can engage in fashion.
I think for me, having lived in Italy for a long time, I think what struck me moving back to England again was that in Italy, people take more care over their clothes, over their shoes. They really take their shoes to the cobblers to be mended. They take their jumpers to be darned. You know, the dry cleaners does everything. They'll do hand washing. They darn everything, and people keep things, take much better care of them. They look after them and they last them much longer. And it's very normal to see somebody wearing something that belonged to their grandma or to their mother. And it's that just, and I think it used to happen. I mean, I can remember my grandma. I can remember that happening here. And you don't have to be rich to take care of things, and just buy something that's a bit better quality, but it's going to last. I think it's just that's the key for me, and that's the thing that's a shame. And it's a shame when you see clothes, you know, in shops. I mean, I look at knitwear because I'm a knitwear expert, but you know, you see something's made out of something completely synthetic, and you can just tell that it's, after one wash, it's just not going to be worth anything. And that's for me, that's the problem.
Darning classes are one of the big things that happened during lockdown, apparently. Loads of darning classes, so perhaps that
absolutely.
There was a really interesting thing about that craft and make and mend, that not just in fashion, across the board, across all aspects of UK society, Western society, people just are much more comfortable with throwing things away and rather than getting it repaired. So there's a cultural aspect to all of this. I'm just very wary that we are running very short of time. In fact, we've gone over a little bit. And I'm just wondering, just as a last question for each of the panel members, if we can just get your last thoughts on, so the title for today's session is really about wool in the 21st century. What do you think wool should be doing in the 21st century? What's your hope and your vision for how wool is viewed or how it's used, and you know, that sort of long-term picture for wool? So quite a big question, but I'm going to ask you to keep your answers as concise as possible as we can, just because we are running short of time. Anybody like to have a go at that last question?
I'll start if you don't mind. I mean, go on. Sorry, Peter. I was going to say, please, just that it gets used, because for me, just seeing the quantities of sheep and the quantities of fleeces that go to waste in the UK, that really bothered me. I think moving out of London and then into the countryside where I live now, you just see there's fields of sheep everywhere, but it's really hard to get, for me, it's really hard to get British wool. And just that wastage for me really bothered me. And you can use wool for all sorts of things, insulating. You can use it to, you know, line your chimney. You can use it for all sorts, just packaging, insulating food. It can be used for so many things. You know, obviously I'm talking about lower grade wool for things like that, and then obviously there's the higher grades wools that you use for clothing. But I just wish that we used it to its full capacity, really, and that we got to a point where we didn't have to throw any of it away, because I just think that is a crime.
And of course, in this great world of sustainability and being resource efficient, throwing anything away seems to be a crime. So absolutely. And I guess the challenge is, you know, we need innovators, we need designers, we need technical people to work out how we can use this wool in different ways. Thanks very much, Frankie. Peter, Janet, any comments? Last few comments from
I hope that when I go to Italy, they do value wool a lot, and all these spinners participate in helping students and giving lovely wool that is actually going to be in Pitti Filati, for instance. And I wish there was a more sort of a connection, really. I know there are connections, but that it was done on a bigger scale, really, so that people realise that something we've got which is quite unique, and it's reflected in our sort of in our landscape and in our history. And you know, the wool sack is there for a reason in Parliament, and I think it needs to be valued in those terms as well.
Well, I'm really pleased you've mentioned Parliament. I'm just wondering whether the Italian wool industry has survived because of potential government support more than we've had in the UK, maybe. I don't know.
I think lots of things have survived in Italy with government support and regional support. You know, they've got little bits all the way along, which I
think it's regional support.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And finally, Peter, your thoughts on the sort of future of wool?
I think wool can play a very good role, and the Campaign for Wool is seeking to promote that role, for wool to be part of the circular economy. That's the most important thing that we could look to for wool. I think a lot of other fibres, particularly synthetic fibres, measure themselves from cradle to store. If you measure wool sustainability from cradle to grave, you have a very good score. And yeah, I mean, I've been around for a long time, and all I can say is that wool, as far as fibres is concerned, is as good as it gets.
And on that very definitive statement, thank you very much, Peter. I'd just to say personally, thank you very much to the three of you in terms of taking part in the session. And a big thank you to all of the questions that were posted. We had over 80 different questions, and I'm really sorry that we couldn't cover all of them. But I think it just demonstrates how passionate we are about this wool, which is really a very important part of, I guess, British culture and history. And with that, I'd like to hand back over to Caroline.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, for chairing what has been a really fascinating discussion, and to all our panelists and to our very engaged attendees. A great number of questions there, and it just highlights, I think, that we'll need to hold a similar event very soon. Yes, and you know, as we said, you know, apologies we couldn't get through them all this evening, but fantastic just to see the interest there. So before I wrap up, I would like to hand over to Sir David Wootton, the current Master of the Woolmen, to say a few words. So we'll just wait a second for David to join us. Here he is.
Caroline, good evening, and thank you very much. And I'm delighted that the Worshipful Company of Woolmen have the opportunity to co-host this terrific event with the Bradford Textile Society. I was born in Bradford and grew up just up the hill from Salts Mill, which Peter showed us, and near which he still lives, and which I wish that I did, maybe one day. There are quite a large number of members of the Woolmen company watching this. It's been a terrific event. The Worshipful Company of Woolmen are one of the City of London ancient livery companies. We have a social side through great parties. We have a charity side, and I noticed that our charity chair, Peter Huller, is featured in the chat box. Charity side promotes education and skills and innovation, and we have an industry side which connects up and tries to help the industry from wool on the hoof to end of use, the entire cycle. And we're particularly interested, unsurprisingly, in sustainability and innovation, which is why I warned Janet to what you said with your several reasons for optimism, traceability, recycling, repurposing, etc. And I think you're entirely right to feel optimistic if one looks in the right places and all the right things. I didn't know that one couldn't be allergic to wool, so that's one particular thing that I've learnt this evening. And frankly, I warm too to what you brought all that to, plus celebrating the legacy of craftsmanship. I think that's a great thing to say, and slow down and use what we already have to be part of the balance. Look for diverse uses of wool, and I look forward very much to seeing more of your knitwear range. Peter, you have displayed tonight your truly remarkable knowledge of the industry, always very contemporary, finger on the pulse. And thank you, I wrote it down: buy less, buy well, buy wool. And finally, Mark, I will always remember you for sweat and the absorbent qualities of wool, but well chaired. And thank you for drawing out as many as you could of the 80 questions, and that number of questions is a great compliment to what we've heard, to the quality of the panel, and to the BTS and its organisational abilities, and to you, President Caroline, and thank you very much. We're delighted to be associated with this event, and I've enjoyed it hugely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, and we're delighted that the Woolmen can join us and be with us this evening.
Thank you.
So on behalf of the Bradford Textile Society, I'd like to thank you all for highlighting how wool can contribute to a more sustainable textile industry. And thank you to our attendees this evening. It's been fantastic to see such a strong turnout and so many pertinent questions. Our next lecture, Innovative Approaches to Woven Design and Manufacturing by Juliet Bailey, Director of Dash & Miller and the Bristol Weaving Mill, will take place on Tuesday, the 9th of March, again at 6:30 p.m. And for those of you who are interested in membership, details can be found on our website. Membership gives free access to all of our lectures and preferential access to our annual dinner and design seminar. Finally, there is a brief survey that will pop up when you leave this webinar. We would really appreciate if you could take a minute to complete it. It will help inform our future events. And I'd just like to say a final thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.